Hmm.
Hello, and welcome to The Wild Woman Way, a podcast for women who have broken free from the internal constraints of the inner programming of modern culture and patriarchy and are charting their way into new territories in the world and creating their own cultures and developing new ways in which to be in the world that really allows for wildness to unfold and freedom and expression. And I'm very excited to welcome Justine to this episode. And she is someone that I met in Costa Rica last year. And the way in which I noticed her weaving with her community, weaving community together, like pulling people from all over the place into somehow places and spaces where we could be together and explore. And I really like was so drawn to your collaborative collective like intention and I feel the way that you in the way that you move. And I actually don't know so much about you, and I'm so curious to hear about your journey and your story and sort of like, yeah, what does it mean to be like wild to you, a wild woman, and um how did you get to where you are, and maybe also like what have been the struggles and like what is hard about it, and also would love to know about your crown.
Amazing. Yeah. It's funny because I don't think I go a day anymore without wearing some sort of head accoutrement, like some version of a crown. This one I actually got in Mexico a few weeks ago, and it somehow made it across three different trips and back finally to LA. So I'm happy to be wearing it and sort of intact at the moment. But just want to say thanks, Charlotte, for bringing me on. I'm so excited to talk with you. And honestly, my first thought of when you hit record was your beautiful smile. I just wanted to comment on it because it lights up your whole face and it makes me really happy. So now that that's said, yeah, so where to start? My name is Justine Benanti, but most people call me or know me as Justine Magic Bean, and that has its own sort of story. But I am someone who spent a very long time living a life that I dreamed about from the time I was like 5 years old. And I had no idea that that life was killing me, basically. It was sucking me dry, even though I was doing all of the right things. And there was a point in my life, and we can go into it as we talk, that my life like pivoted so dramatically because of a family emergency that like took my attention. And I realized that there was another way to live. I didn't actually know what it looked like at that point, but I knew that I couldn't go backwards to what I had been doing. And so that's kind of where my personal journey of wildness, I think, started. Growing up, I grew up in New York City, in Brooklyn. I'd literally never been camping before until I decided to go when I was 17 to this outdoor semester school in Colorado. And I spent 6 months like living in the outdoors, backpacking. And that was a huge turning point for me because it like brought me leadership skills and collaboration in a way that I had never experienced before. But, I'm the oldest of six, grew up sort of in the responsible mom role for the most part. And I was a huge tomboy. Part of this journey of the wildness for me is it has a lot to do with my sexuality and my embodiment, and my femininity, because I felt so masculine most of my life. And as I was in my 20s, I experienced, you probably wouldn't see it on my face today, but I had clinical depression for 15 years, probably, deep anxiety and panic attacks. And I just was living a really different existence mentally and physically. And yeah, and now, like I said, I've hit a turning point, and it's been this like beautiful evolution. And I'm so excited to talk about that with you. But that's kind of a little bit of where I started.
Mm, thank you. And I'm curious, what was your life like before? Like when you talk about it, like what was the day to day, or like what were you doing that was so out of alignment?
For sure. So I grew up wanting to be an archaeologist, like since the time I was 5 years old, even though I grew up in Brooklyn. My dad and I would spend a lot of time with my family in the Southwest. And so I'd go fossil hunting all the time and, Indiana Jones and all the things. And so I was like, I want to be an archaeologist. And when I went to college, I went to George Washington University for undergrad and grad, but I declared my major literally 2 weeks into my freshman year and I never looked back. Like I was so excited to be an archaeologist, an academic. I ended up trying all different archaeologies under the sun, and I ended up landing in grad school on maritime archaeology. So my focus was actually slave trade shipwrecks. I was an explorer and a storyteller and a historian. And, I was in the field probably like 5 months a year, diving on shipwrecks and excavating and photographing and documenting. And it was a life that I had dreamed of, basically. And at the same time, I could not sustain myself like for a living. I ended up having like the most beautiful experiences. I started a nonprofit with a colleague of mine 14 years ago now, I think, called Youth Diving with a Purpose, where we taught high school students how to map shipwrecks for the Park Service. It was a full scholarship program. And it's actually the thing that I'm the most proud of in my contribution in that part of my life. They're just like the kind of kids that you want to leave the planet's hands in. And it's brought me a lot of joy to be part of that program. But I also worked for the State Department, with another nonprofit working on the illegal looting of antiquities in the Middle East. So doing all these really cool things and like exploring the world. And I literally needed my dad's help to pay with my bills, like just to pay rent. I was living in DC for 9 years, which is so wild to think about now. Such a different energy there. And it served its purpose for sure. But an academic lives a very different type of life that I'm living right now. And it was kind of like, I had great friends, but they were friends, and this is not to diminish my friendships, but most people, and like I said, myself included, we become friends with people that were around because of convenience, right? Or like circumstance, like we're going to college, so we become friends with our college friends, like work friends, but it's not as often that we like branch out or have the opportunity to expand to like really similar value systems and like get to see who else in the world meets those values, right? And convene in different places all over the place. So I was sort of in the former category at the time. And this is something that's really significant for me. It's funny, it's a funny reference, but do you remember Avatar, the first movie? There's a part of the movie where they like say the phrase "I see you," like it's like part of their thing, like the language. And he's like, "I see you." She's like, "I see you." And I remember thinking, this is like in 2009, so it was like right after university. And I remember thinking I had never been seen in my life. I had no idea what that felt like, and I wanted it so badly.
Mm.
And I didn't get that feeling until like 2017. So it was a really long time until I actually know what that felt like. And to me, I just didn't feel like I belonged. Academia, and this is not to disparage my profession, because I really love the pursuit of archaeology and the storytelling of people who were literally written out of history. Like all of that is so, so wonderful to talk about and to share with the world. And like academia is rooted in very deeply misogynistic, patriarchal processes, a lot of sexual harassment. I was always the young woman in the room. So like, you must be the secretary, right? Like that kind of stuff. And just like a lot of like diminutive moments of feeling really small. And so I just learned to be small for a really, really long time. And my contributions, I just never took a lot of pride in them because I just felt so small all the time. And so that's kind of the life that I'm talking about. And yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, so you were living as an archaeologist in this academia world. It's interesting. I'm glad you brought this in about academia being like a system of patriarchy. And and I think like yeah, when I look back at being in academia, I really it's also such a mental body thing. It's all about like this, and this is just like one part of life, you know?
Of course.
And yeah, the structure, the system and the structure itself has its roots in patriarchy. So of course, like the experience of being there and the whole way it's set up is not really empowering. um yeah, it's
Yeah.
about winning and being the best and competing and
Yep.
yeah
So much competition.
yeah yeah yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just really interesting to be in a space where it doesn't matter what you look like or who you are, someone is going to have a judgment about it. Like,
Mm.
oh, I cannot tell you how many times I would wear glasses just to make myself more like serious looking. And
Mm.
then someone would say, wow, you're going for the sexy librarian look today. It was just like, I couldn't win. Like, it sounds really silly, but it was just like constant, just like the belittling of like my contribution.
Mm.
And of course there were people who celebrated me, and I don't want to diminish those people because they were very influential for me, but yeah, the whole system was just, it just didn't feel right. But I also didn't know any other life, right? Like I wanted to do this thing, and we're only taught, going to the wild woman part of it, and like sort of the living outside the matrix part. Like we're only taught that you can be one thing in life. Like you get your job and then you just sort of go with it for the rest of eternity. And that was how I was, brought up, so to speak. My dad was a dreamer and all those things, but like that's sort of just the society narrative, especially in the career that I was going to choose.
Mm.
You get tenure and you sort of continue on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't satisfying for me. And then my nana got terminal cancer diagnosis, and it changed everything for me, which is sort of the pivotal moment for me. I just started my PhD in the Netherlands, and I was about to sign a TV show actually with the Travel Channel about archaeology, and sort of like a Bourdain-esque culture show. And my nana got cancer, and she was the most important person in my world, to this day. Um, and if she had only held on for the 2 months that they had given her, because pancreatic is quite aggressive at that point, I would have gone right back to my old life without thinking about it. I quit my job and I did the thing because it was just kind of a no-brainer to want to take care of her full time, but I fully expected to go right back into that space. And as much as it was the most tragic experience of my life to this day, it was also the biggest gift of my life, because I think that she always knew this type of thing. She just knew that I needed space from my old life. And she held on for almost a whole year. So I was taking care of her full time for a year at that point. And I'm just so grateful because I was able to breathe. I was literally dying alongside her. Like I lost 25 pounds taking care of her, and I weighed 120 pounds. It was quite dramatic. Um, and when I realized that, I needed to take care of myself, it was just the first time in my life I hadn't even thought about taking care of myself at all. Like I got into yoga, into meditation for the first time. Never tried any of those things before. I was actually scared of meditation, if you can believe it. And now I do it every day. But and that was the first time I started going to this thing called Medi Club, which it was started by my friend Jesse, actually, whose birthday is today. It was a monthly 200-person meetup for people who wanted to meditate together, like people like us and our age. And I ended up co-hosting it with him and a few others later on. But it was the first time I ever felt like I was part of something bigger than myself that wasn't, again, something of just convenience. It was something I was really interested in. And then all these people suddenly had similar values, or like were opening my world in a way that I could never have dreamed of before. And it was slow, but it was consistent. And, as my grandma passed, I don't know if you've ever had experience with witnessing the process of death, but in my experience, I had no idea what energy reading was at the time. I wasn't in this woo-woo world yet at all. But when she passed, I was holding her hand And I physically felt the love that she had created in her life leave with her to the other side.
Mm.
And that's the only way that I can explain it. Love, in my experience, is the only thing besides light that transcends time, space, and dimension. And in that moment, I realized that everything else in this life doesn't matter besides the cultivation of love, because it's the only thing that comes with us. And so I realized I needed to reorient my life around that purpose, like that life's purpose. And again, couldn't go back to that, had no idea what the future held because I'd never thought about anything different. I went through an identity crisis probably for 8 straight months of separating myself, who I am, from my work. And it took a few years to like reorient around this life, purpose of creating love and connection, which is what it sort of built into, and then building community and all these things sort of spun out of that. But that was like the moment that was so crucial to me, because it just reoriented everything that I needed to pay attention to. Got rid of my depression, got rid of my anxiety, like I committed to it. Psychedelics helped a lot with that. I'd never taken a drug in my life. Not that psychedelics I don't think are drugs, but no substance that was mind altering before my life until I was 31. Went to Burning Man. That itself was a whole, would love to share about that. But yeah, so these sort of like balloon effects of starting to live what is an authentic life, live what actually makes me feel alive, all happened because of that moment.
Mm. Wow. So when you decided to commit, your purpose being like when you say your purpose was to then do that, you mean like to serve love or to create that in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously not perfect. It is a life's journey. And every time I sit in plant medicine, it comes up of like, oh yes, you think you know how to love, Justine, but you are at the baby steps of knowing. Like there's so much more to learn. And there's obviously ego involved in this too, because I'm a human with shadows and things. But I try really hard to, with every action that comes out of me, to create love with that, or words that come out of my mouth. Again, not perfect, but like even on the smallest level, if someone cuts me off in traffic, I'm a New Yorker. I'm going to say, like, my natural reaction is to go like, the thing. But then I go, I love you. I hope you have a beautiful life at the end of it, because I want to like quickly counter the negative energy I just sent to them. So like I still have the reaction, but I have tools now and modalities that I can like sort of counter, things like that come up. But yeah, it took a couple of years, but I went part-time to archaeology. I officially retired last year. I tried a couple more things. I became a sex, love, and relationship coach under Layla Martin. And that was really beautiful. I was working with men for a couple of years during the pandemic. And then, it sort of just kept coming more and more towards community building, because I had started to do it for fun the last couple of years in New York, learning from people around me. And then when I moved to LA 4 years ago, it was right before the pandemic started. And I started this thread that sort of grew and expanded when most other communities were sort of becoming silent or, dissected because of different opinions about the pandemic and things like that. And all these other communities have come from that I've been growing and building around me for the last few years. And then 2 years ago at this point, a couple of friends of mine who are now Queen Bean's board of directors have helped me through some sort of like money abundance experiences and things. They were like, you need to stop building community for free. Like it's your superpower, like connection and creating heart like led experiences is your superpower, and you need to do this as your job. And so I've actually now fully stepped into that role, like both for play and for work, which is really cool. And like I said, it's taken 7 years to sort of get to this point, but it feels like I've hit career nirvana for the first time in my life, because all the communities that I'm working with are actually connected to different points of my life in a way that has come back around. Like working with cultural heritage again from a community perspective, working with coaching, working with communities in LA, working with people who want to change the world, like all of these things. And so that's been a really beautiful evolution for me. And then, to tie it back to the original query of embodiment and wild woman, and like, how does this sort of feel in my body? As you were saying, talking about academia, it's such a heady experience, very much so. And I also, at the time, felt very disembodied, partly because I was this like young female in a very boundaryless profession, so to speak. And, archaeology, you're just like sleeping on top of everybody all the time because it's very close quarters and there's no funding, and, you're sharing beds. It's not great from the outside looking in, to be honest. And again, I felt really masculine most of my life internally, and everybody in the outside was always viewing me as super feminine because of the way that my body looked or looks. And for the first time, I was kind of going through this, I'll call it a sexual renaissance, like when I was sort of entering community and exploring, and it felt like for the first time I was able to explore what real love connections were, and just different types of experiences that most people have in their early 20s. And it opened my eyes to the idea that I felt like such a fraud on the inside. Like I felt like everybody else was experiencing me this one way, deeply feminine, connected, sexy, all these things. And I felt none of it, like completely numb to the idea of it. And so part of my unlocking as a wild woman, or like just sort of how do I continue to evolve and live in alignment in what my highest truth is, I went to Burning Man. And I can't remember, have you been to the burn?
Yeah.
You have, yeah. I mean, you can share your experience when I'm done. And it's just like, for anybody watching or listening, it's going to transform you in ways you will never have expected. And it changed my life personally in every way it needed to be changed. My first burn in 2019. And I felt like for the first time, I could be in a place without constraint from anybody. And I felt who I was in my nakedness, in my body, in my femininity, in my wholeness, who that is in the most peak expression of my life. And I went through this exercise afterwards of, okay, well, now that I know what that feels like, I certainly can't go backwards. How do I do that on an everyday basis that's socially appropriate? I can't go glitter, covered in glitter, naked all the time, as much as I would want to. And I am naked quite a lot, as you might remember from Costa Rica. But like, how do you do that on an everyday basis? And so I came up with 3 words. It doesn't have to be 3, but for me, 3 words that embody my essence. And so now my home is designed around those words, my hair, my outfits, my car, like my entire sort of realm. When people meet me or when they come into a space that I've created, they know instantly, 1, how I want them to feel from me, and also who I am at my highest. And so for me, those words are cozy, ethereal, and just a little bit sexy. And so like, which is great, like reorienting my life around that has been really beautiful, because I cannot tell you how many people have walked into my home, which is literally built around a cuddle puddle, who have come in and been like, wow, this home is so cozy and ethereal. What a like, ethereal is a very specific word, Charlotte, like, and I cannot tell you how many people have said it. So I feel solid that I'm getting the message across. But yeah, so anyway, long story short, I know I've been talking for a minute, but the embodiment piece has finally sort of come into play. I did Layla's course to become a coach, but really it was to dive into my personal like experiences with Tantra and embodiment, and like really getting in touch with my shadows for the first time in my life. Like that's kind of when I started the work, so to speak. And it's changed my life in so many ways. People in the last 2 or 3 years have just shared not only how different I am energetically, but just how sure of myself and how confident. And, all of this is just sort of the perfect storm of feeling like I belong and I don't need anyone's permission for anything anymore. I don't need to feel small. I can play as big as I want. I can love and be loved so wholly without taking it away from anybody else. Like, oh, I'm loving this person, which means there's less love for this person. It's not the case. And so all these little discoveries have just like the accumulation of it, allows me to like walk around with a fucking flower crown, like all over the street, and it's like, I feel like this is the most normal thing in the world, And so it ends up being that I be like this sort of permission slip in the end, because when I was in what I call the muggle world, I was very confronted by people who are in our world. I didn't understand it at all. And it was like the antithesis of my value system, probably at the time. Like I would have thought if you showed me a video of me today, back then, I would have thought it was like a fabrication. That's how far away I was. And now I get to be this like invitation to people who were like me back then, who are it's like when plant medicine calls to you, you finally heed the call when you're ready, right? Like you're ready to answer it. The same thing with like a different way to live outside the matrix, however you want to say, entering your wild phase, your freedom of expression phase. And it's like the biggest blessing that I get to be part of that now, because when I needed it, those people were so crucial to my evolution.
Oh, I'm just so like struck by how much you own yourself and like commit to expressing it, and like, yeah, it's like when you were saying those three things that you like, you have these as your mantras kind of, and that they create what you wear in your space. Like I totally felt this from you of like, it's kind of like I'm thinking like, why can't I own myself like this, like what is the block? And I just feel really glad that it's like, it's so it's nobody else, and it's just like really
Yes.
unique, how you create your life like this. And yeah, so how do you own this?
Yeah. So like I said, it's been an evolution, but and there's been a lot of people in my extended communities who have been, well, I'll call it lovingly challenged by my self-expression or my evolution. And again, I was that person for a really long time, confronted by my own shadows mirrored in another human, right? It's not a detriment at all. It's merely an observation. But even in spaces where we're so quote unquote conscious and awakened and evolved and all these things, we like see life differently. There are still a lot of pockets of things that feel really taboo. And a lot of that has to do with like the sacred sexuality piece and, the embodiment of the feminine. And like, we're all in the same society. Like we still have the same insecurities rooted from the places, that we grew up in and all these things. And so I fully get it. And, the evolution of my confidence and my body has been a really huge one as well. I didn't share this before, but, and it's a personal story, but I like sharing it because it's confronting for people. And also it changes perspectives on things, because it certainly changed mine. But when I was taking care of my Nana, I told you I lost those 20 pounds. I've always looked like this, like very sort of hourglassy figure type thing since I was 12, which also informed how people treated me and things like that, or didn't take me as seriously, so to speak, in my profession. But when I lost that weight and gained it back when I was recovering, it didn't go back to the same place. And so I'm assuming I can talk about my breasts on this podcast. And so they were physically the same size, but they weren't full anymore in the same way, because the weight did not redistribute from where it came. And so I spent about a year and a half crying in the mirror every time I saw myself naked. So being naked for me is certainly an evolution to the point that I'm at now. And there was a point where I was in this group experience with some people that are very loved by me. And I remember thinking, and again, this is sort of during that sexual renaissance experience of like, oh, I'm in community and people, suddenly I feel like I belong and I'm discovering my body again and all these things. And like, I remember thinking, oh my God, like, don't take my shirt off. I'm so like, I just was so traumatized by the idea. And I was like, you know what? This is the last time I ever want to think that thought. I want to be fully present for an experience like this. And so I ended up getting what I consider reconstructive breast surgery, breast augmentation. But for me, you know, I was like, give me a 31-year-old's breast, not a 21-year-old's breast. Like, I want to feel just like me before this experience, you know. And I think if it had come from like breastfeeding or being pregnant or something like more natural, I would have felt differently about the whole thing. But it was something that was so detractive, you know, like a tragedy of my life. So it didn't feel like a natural thing that was happening to me. Anyway, so I got the surgery, and one of the reasons I went to the burn that year finally, because it had orbited me for quite a few years at that point, and I just never felt called. But finally, I was like, oh, the way that people talk about Burning Man is that they get to be this like, you know, expression, no holds barred, all the things. And, you know, it's kind of like a big hello universe moment. And so it was kind of like 10 months after my surgery that the burn was going to happen. And so I was like, this is the year I'm going to go. When I went, it was like this, you know, rediscovery of my old but my new self. And I was just like on display to the world, which is why I was naked for the first time in public. Like it was like such a sort of, you know, not just rip off the clothes moment, but like rip off of my soul moment of expression. And it was so fucking amazing. Because I had an amazing time, but my breasts had their own completely separate experience. It was great. And, you know, it still happens to this day where people are like, you know, oh, I just didn't like recognize you. And then I take my shirt off at a, you know, or a lot of our parties gatherings end up being quite naked, just not because they're sexual, but just because it's so natural to be in the body that God gave you, you know? And people are like, oh, you're, you know, now I recognize you. It's funny to have that happen. But it really has been this like deep internal journey of like acceptance and building confidence and like knowing that I can accept myself in all forms. And I still feel like the surgery was like one of the best decisions I've ever made because I felt whole again. And again, reconstructive, and that changes people's, you know, I had complicated feelings myself about people who get breast jobs, you know. So, you know, that is a huge part of this evolution of just like, how did you phrase it? Like, how do I operate, be this way all the time?
Yeah. I said, how do you own who you are?
Own it. Yes. How do I own who I am? Like that for me is a huge part of it. And I don't feel like, based on other people's feedback, that I ever create unsafe spaces for people. Like when I'm fully nude at a party, it's not because I'm like, I want this experience to feel sexual. It's like, I want it to feel so normal and natural that everybody else feels really safe and has the permission slip. Because when I do that, a lot of people are like, oh, cool, Justine is now naked, now I can be naked. And it's like they're just sort of waiting for the person who has, you know, the moment to do it, and then they can take the step into it. So I get to be that person now a lot, and it's really beautiful. But along this journey, I've had a lot of judgment from people in our spaces. And at the time, it really bothered me because I was still trying to figure out where did I, you know, fit into all these different communities. And now I feel I've really hit this peak moment of growth, and obviously will continue to do so and meet my shadows and all those things. But I feel really solid in having transformed what my friends call and I call queen bean energy. It feels like there is a plateau that I'm on right now of like, I don't need your permission. I don't need, you know, to feel like I need you to bring me into things to feel comfortable. Like there's all these sort of things that I felt for a really long time. I say that without judgment for people who still feel that way, because I was there for a really long time. And yeah, I just want everybody to feel really safe and included. Like, I won't even have a birthday party unless my friend allowed me to have my party on his property last year for 200 people, because I didn't want to not invite anybody that I knew. Like, I invited 500 people, and because I don't want people to feel like they're not important to me when there are so many people that are important to me. And people are like, how do you know that many people? It's like, I take a lot of my time on a daily basis to check in and to reach out and to like continuously develop these friendships. And I would never want someone to feel like they didn't belong in my space ever, because I deeply know what that feels like. And so I think all this is to say is like, I own it by being really inclusive. I own it by being really confident and being like, I walk my walk and talk my talk. And for a while, I was still really figuring that out. But I think people really notice now, like, how much that feels true for me and for them. Yeah.
So beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah. So what would you say? I like want to switch gears a little bit, because I want to hear more from you around like, what does it take to like build a community? Like, how do you do it? Or like, what do you mean by that? And when you say community, like, what is it? Is it a physical place? Is it like a group of people? Or like, how does this, because I feel this is just a word that's everywhere. Like, we're in a community.
Totally.
I'm curious, yeah,
Yeah,
what for you?
that's a great question. There's two jokes that I like to say. One is like, when you're in community, you sort of know, when you say that to someone and they're in it, they know what that means. And if they're not, they're like, what does that mean? The community. It's like, there is no that formal boundaries. It's kind of this amorphous blob that goes all over the world. I like to think of it as like, we have these different like sub communities or interests that all share similar value systems, and then they Venn diagram all over the place. So like Burning Man, Summit, wellness, meditation, fintech, nomad life, reality. Like, there's all these different things that sort of orbit me. LA, New York people, like, they keep growing. And then obviously the more Venn diagrams you're in, those sort of closer to the core of it you are. And like, my dad always, this is a second joke, which is kind of a crude one, I guess, depending on your perspective, but he's always like, you use this word community so much. Like, he was always afraid that, I was sort of being sucked into a cult, so to speak. But it's like, it's not like we have leaders. There's, like I said, there's no memberships. There's no like, these are the rules you need to follow. It's none of that. Just people who sort of feel like they understand the world differently, who want to live differently, I always call it outside the matrix. They know that there's more to this life. They've had some sort of spiritual awakening, whether that's religious or not religious. Like, I'm not here to tell anyone how to live that way at all. But
Oops.
you there?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
We're
You're
back.
back.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the joke is that, he's like, is it a cult? And I'm like, well, it's not a cult. It's definitely not a cult. Definitely not a cult. And I still share a lot of experiences and really cool peak experiences around the world that so many people will never get to experience. And I feel so blessed because of that. Again, I live very differently. And so the fact that I have made choices that have led me to this point, I feel it's not luck, because once you discover what a different way of living is that works for you, and are excited about ways to develop that in the future, you just know you can't go back. And so it ends up not being a choice anymore. I think we maybe talked about this in Costa Rica a little bit. It's not like, I'm so lucky that I get to do this. It's like, no, I'm waking up and making a conscious decision that I'm going to live like this every single day that I wake up. Whatever that iteration means, it means sitting in the shadows, it means sitting in the fire, meeting those dark places, meeting the joys and the highs of life and the deep, deep griefs. And those are the people that start to gravitate around you. And so, the community sort of, in my experience, forms around itself. Obviously there's a lot of factors that bring people in. The burning we keep bringing up, because once you talk to a burner about Burning Man, they can't shut up about it. Another truth. But like, there's these sort of, we'll call them pilgrimages, so to speak, that like we all, a lot of us have in our lives. And I feel really, again, blessed to have that part of my experience. But for me, like building these communities is so rewarding, because in the beginning, I was the catalyst for the ones that I created, right? Like I was sort of the linchpin. But successful communities, in my opinion, become successful when that linchpin is no longer needed, right? Like everyone themselves then becomes their own nodes, because you like created the means for them to get to know one another on their own. And then the community expands naturally. People self-actualize. And I end up being really just the best hype woman in the end, like the support system, the admin person, make sure people are like treating each other well and all that kind of stuff, like minimal. And I like get things going when someone's like, oh, I have this really cool offering in this event, or like really love support in this. And I'm like, yes, this person, like cheerleader, and so that's kind of ends up being what I do as a community leader and a community builder, like making people feel really seen and supported. And then also making the rest of the community feel like, oh, well, now I know that she's also in my corner, and also the rest of the community is going to help me when I have a thing, because now I'm interested in helping this person, right? It becomes sort of the self-fulfilling experience. And a lot of successful communities around the world have had this throughout history, like they come in, they grow up together, they go out, they get the skills, they come back, they bring it in, and everyone sort of cycles and brings more growth and expansion within. And so, it's obviously the shared value system, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of deep connection. And I think also part of it is making a conscious choice to be together, right? Like in my communities, at least, it's very global, but we all, a lot of us, and continue in these different pockets, will make conscious choices of like, okay, we're going to be at this thing together. Like someone's going to plan a thing so we can make sure we have this experience. And I get that comes with a lot of privilege to be able to do that. Nomad life is not something for everybody. And, there's a lot of factors into it for sure, that, we don't really have time to go into, but that's true. And it's still a decision to like continue to say, yes, I want to be with my people, and I'm going to continue to invest in myself for them, and then in them as well. So for them, it's like, yeah, I always do this because I'm Italian. I talk with my hands. So, and the last part of it is really the vulnerability and intention of being vulnerable together. Like you can be in a group of people and not know any of them, even though you spend a massive amount of time with them, right? Like it happens at work conferences and all those types of spaces all the time. But I think a huge difference in the spaces and communities that I exist in and create and co-create is this intention of being deeply vulnerable with one another. And that can be really scary, obviously. Even the best of us who have had a lot of practice with it, it's still scary. And, and there's a lot of unknowns with that. But I think leading with that is, in my opinion, one of the most crucial ways of like choosing to sort of live on the other side of life and choosing differently, and living amongst community, all these other things that like kind of come as a result of that, because people gravitate to people who use their heart, like lead with their heart, and that takes practice, absolutely, but it's so worth the reward. And I know from experience how much I didn't do that for the majority of my life. Like that has been an evolution as well. So just in case anyone thought it was easy for me, it's been a process. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I like the way you talk about it, because like my experience of community is like it's based on like the values that we share and experiences that we create together. And it's not so much of like being in one place. It's really like it's an energetic thing. It's like it's not, yeah, it's not tangible. It's just like I feel if I'm in community with people, and if we're together in somehow weaving like, we're on the same team. It feels like we're on the same team, we're fighting the same fight, or we're like having the same kind of like, intentions or cares, and it somehow is creates this like this community. So yeah, I like the way you talk about it, because I feel it's this thing of like people say I need community or I'm missing community, and then I feel it's really like it's not missing. It's like you just have to create it. You have to make it. You have to, as you do so skillfully, like you have to weave it, and contribute into it. Is like you were saying, we have this phrase in possibility management, which is committing to what other people are committed to, like committing to what you're committed to. So
Hmm.
like if you're with someone and they tell you that this is what they want in their life, then as their friend, I will commit to what they're committed to for themselves. You know,
Yeah,
I feel that's what's like starts to really make people together, like in community. Um,
that's beautiful. That's a great way to sum it up, because we want the best for the people that are around us, that we like choose to have in our space.
yeah.
And so, committing to that with them is a very crucial part of it, I think.
Yeah.
And to your point about energy, we create our own realities.
Yeah.
So that's hard to hear sometimes, because of like, I'm sick, I'm this and that. Like, I've had tragic things happen to me too. And there is, it's not like there's a reason for everything. That might be true, but there is an energy that we bring when we're in different states of our life that continue to bring things of that same thing into us, And so if you want more of something, or like to change your life, like it takes time and energy and investment to do it, but it will come if you continue to say, hey, this is how I want to live my life. It will come, I promise. You know, the people will show up at the party one day, or the event that you're going to throw, or that book club, or whatever it is. Start small, but
Mm.
like it really is about consistency. And at the first part of it is putting yourself in the spaces of, people are not going to materialize out of nowhere. Like community is not just going to show up around you, but like if you start at the places where you think they might be, and then you make those investments, like it's going to happen. I sincerely believe that.
Mm. That's so good. Yeah, thank you. Because I know I have a story that a lot of people that are in this Wild Woman Way community and in my community, like that are tuning into this podcast, have a desire to really be in community more, create community. And this like thing about, okay, go to the places where you think they might be as like that as a first step. Um, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a
And
great first step. And even, you with this community around the podcast, like there are so many opportunities for people who are building things like the way that you're creating, who lose opportunities to build community around their audiences, because they're like, it's sort of like a one-way street, when it could be a very much a two-way street, where then with enough support from you or whoever it ends up being, that community self-actualizes, like, oh, you live in London too, cool, I've been missing, like I'm looking for someone like me, let's meet up for a coffee or whatever. And then the branches start going, and the nodes start making their own, connections. And so it's such a beautiful place to be in, because community can really start from anywhere, you
mm,
know?
yeah,
So yeah, it's really fantastic.
yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Hearing about your Burning Man. I also went for the first time in 2019.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Great year.
it was really great. And it had such a similar experience. Like my life had really fallen apart right before then. I just like I was bit like hanging on by like a thread to life. I was really like in a dark place. And I went by myself. I went by myself. I knew
Wow.
two people that this one person was like, yeah, you can come and make like acquaintances that had kind of guided me there. And I just went to a camp that I knew no one, all by myself. And it was this like experience of, I was like, nobody knows me. Like who, and
Hmm.
it really made me think of like, who am I really? Like and somehow it just came out. Like I didn't have to try to like, it was just suddenly like who I was without so many of like my programs somehow just arrived, right? In this like really open, loving, like space. And it was really a huge awakening for me. And I feel like it's kind of one of those things when if I tell people, it's like kind of sounds stupid. Like, okay, you had an awakening at Burning Man. It's like people go there and they dress in costumes and like, it's this like consumer thing. And there's a lot of shadows to it. But the, for me, really like in the time and place in that we are in history and like of modern culture and of people having been so like toxified by it, really like you go to school and you do this thing and it's really they're just it's so much putting you in this one path, and then to suddenly go to a place where it's like there's no rules, there's no structure or whatever. It's kind of like
Yeah, creative free for all.
it's kind of a free for all. And I actually think it's very revolutionary for a lot of people that have never actually had this experience to really just like drop everything and find out who you are, like something like this. And I'm so glad that I went by myself
Mm,
because it was just so important for me to like connect to, if I went with if I'd gone with like a girlfriend, or you know what I mean, it would have just been okay, somehow still kind of adapting to the needs. It was just like, no, it was just like, okay, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And that was such a big, yeah. So I feel like part of the Wild Woman way that you're sharing about is really like taking steps to get your authentic, like to get enough like inner matrix around like who you are, to like have some solid, like you were talking about confidence, like foundation confidence, and like okay, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm, here to serve. And like, yeah, it really inspires me. These experiences that are created like that offer that opportunity.
yeah, I
Um,
love that. Yeah, I mean, it's like a brick by brick layer, like you have to keep adding it up. And I'll end because I know we're coming up at an hour, but last year my brother, he burned for the first time he didn't camp with me, but he spent most of his time at my camp. And at the end of it, he was like, Justine, because for such a long time, I was the rainbow sheep of the family. Like once I sort of like started, I always so because I went to the academic life and everyone's like in a very different world. But I started living this type of life and everyone's like, ooh. And there was a lot of friction with my parents for a while and they just like didn't get it. I sort of like couldn't tell if I was going down a dark path or just such a different path that it was like just unknown to them. But my brother, he was like 30 seconds into Burning Man, he was like, I finally get what your life is about, like why you are so committed to this freedom and to this expression, to this truth and to your alignment. Like I never understood it before, and I think people have to experience it in a lot of ways to like really embody that truth. But it felt really good to be seen by him finally and like have this sort of like aha moment together. Not only was it fun to be there out there, shared experience, but you know I've worked so hard to get to this place with a lot of commitment, and at the same time just being in spaces like that, like it feels so easy, and it felt, yeah, it just felt really good to be seen for that trans transit transition transmutation of my life, because it is possible. He was like, it's totally possible to live this way.
mm,
So I felt really good about that. Yeah.
beautiful. Hmm. I wanted to ask you a little bit about like your relationships. Like I know you had told me something kind of cool about like the types of relationships you have, but I don't know if that's too personal, but I just
uh,
wanted.
no, for sure. Yeah, so again part of this, like, what is my truth to share out loud and all these things, like whose business is it of my sex life and my romantic life and all these types of things. Like I've been bisexual my whole life. I never thought it was my family's business, not because I wasn't comfortable sharing with them, but I wasn't going to bring a woman home for them to meet. Like I'm hetero romantic in that way. And then, the last few years I've evolved. And it was a conversation with my friend Fish actually that sort of inspired this thought process. Because for me, originally, like polyamorous felt really like, gosh, anything beyond monogamy. And then I was like transitioning into monogamish. And that's probably my ideal type of like romantic partnership is monogamish. But he was like, I always thought that you were poly because you have such deeply committed intimate relationships with certain people, and so I just assumed that you were poly. And so I like really toyed with this idea and label and identity. And over Christmas last year, so almost a year ago, we were over hibachi dinner at this Japanese restaurant with my mom and my aunts and my siblings, and they were asking me about this guy I was dating. I was like, well, don't get too attached, like we're still new. And they're like, well, who else are you dating? I was like, well, I'm like engaged to like 7 of my friends. And they're like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, I'm polyamorous. And sort of became this thing. They're like, what's that? And it was like really, really beautiful. And it ended up actually, just like a side note, being really special because someone else in my family came out at the same time, because they were like, oh, I saw you out on the limb and I wanted to share with you. And also I haven't felt like there was a great moment to do it. And so it was really beautiful to share that with someone in my family. Like that, I'll never leave that memory for that reason. It was just such a beautiful moment. But my family was like so fully accepting of this. And then I called my dad, who I was really worried about. And I was like, okay, look, everybody else knows. I FaceTimed him in London where he was visiting my sister. I was like, okay. And he was like, how does it feel to tell me? And I was like, honestly, a relief. Like it felt like I'd been holding on to this my whole life somehow, even though I never thought it was their business, and he was so loving, and that man has come a long way. I'll just give him credit for sure. It's been an evolution. We've finally been able to talk about plant medicine together. That's like its own thing. But yeah, I'm engaged to, I call them my fellowship, because the 8th person will be like my romantic life partner who I'll have kids with, but like a fellowship of the ring. A huge Lord of the Rings fan. So on the 9th, but like, my friends and I have exchanged rings and proposals, and to various degrees of intensity and complexity. And really, each of them is a different type of commitment, but like most of them are platonic. Some of them are sometimes sexual, but like almost across the board, mostly platonic. And the idea is like polyamorous to mean like multiple love. And for me, it's multiple whole love, and none of it is detractive from any of the others. I can commit myself when that person needs me in my entirety. It's like the same as if a kid was sick, or your mom needs you, or your romantic partner needs you. Like that's sort of my level of commitment. And some of them extend to the part of like, well, my kids need something happens to me, like then I help step in and help raise their kid. Like there's like these types of levels of commitment together. And it's really been beautiful, because I said it earlier, alluded to it. It never dawned on me that I could love so wholly, so multiplied, without having to take anything away from anybody else. And so that's been a really beautiful development in my life. I'm still excited about having a monogamish romantic life partner that I get to raise kids with. Like I want to live in community. Costa Rica is certainly on my radar for one of the reasons I spend so much time there, because I want to be surrounded by people that think like me and want to experience life in the same way with my kids and help raise our families together. And they'll have such a beautiful network around them of like these people that we've committed ourselves mutually to, or that I have rather. And yeah, so I call myself solo poly in that way, because I'm not looking necessarily to be dating multiple people at once when I'm in a romantic partnership, but that person will know that I am time committed in these very deeply intimate, vulnerable ways to these friends, essentially. And the last thing I'll say on it is, I've been to 49 weddings in my life, like 50 this summer. It's coming summer, which is a lot of weddings, and I feel really blessed. But like, I love celebrating love, and people who have not personally had those experiences yet. Like I have not had a wedding yet. I haven't had babies yet. I've gotten to propose before, and I've been proposed to now. So that's been a really like a beautiful experience I never thought I'd get to have. But we have these like certain sort of like designated milestones in life that we get to celebrate big, that society thinks are like important enough. And, I'm of the thought train of there are so many other moments to celebrate in life. Like I feel so freaking grateful and blessed that I have these people to share my life with and my community and all these things. And I just want to like note that the fact that these people have dedicated themselves to me in a way that's like deeply committed as I have to them, it's something to celebrate. And I feel really excited about that, even though it's like very not traditional. So yeah.
That's so epic. That's so beautiful. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And
If I could have
also,
imagined this life, I would never have dreamed of it. It's so much better than I ever imagined. It's so much better. Yeah.
Wow. Ah, that was so nourishing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlotte, for the opportunity to chat with you and to drop in about things that feel so alive for me.
Yeah. You're welcome. And how can people find you or join, or like if you want to leave any last words? I'll also in the section just put whatever your website or whatever you have, things like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the most, quickest way to get in touch with me is, at Justine Magic Bean on Instagram. I'm some of the communities that I'm part of for, things that I feel really aligned with. I'll say is one of them is the Grateful Giraffes. If you're in LA or New York or Tel Aviv and Austin, and we're growing in other places, but like this is a community of heart-led thought leaders who are deeply centered around the practice of gratitude. And like everybody in that community is someone who could be your new best friend. It's one of the only spaces I've been in that feels like there are no cliques. And these are in-person communities. And I feel really grateful to be a part of that and to be helping curate that community. Another one is Asraya, which is a global community of people who have sort of like hit their stride in life, really are interested in learning more entrepreneurial skills that they've been using, but in a different way, like with AI and future technology, but are deeply rooted in commitment to the planet and stewardship of ancient wisdom. And we're growing that one. And so I'm really excited for that one because I actually get to learn a lot more from sort of like the trickle down. It really lights me up. And that one's more digital, but we're creating more in-person experiences. So it's open to a lot more because it's accessible. So I feel really great sharing that one. And, just on the side, I have this a low level way of creating connection in the world for me is I've had this for 5 years, fixmydatingprofile.com. It's like, I came from, like just so many swiping. You're like, I bet this person is really amazing, but I would never know because their profile is so terrible. You know what I mean? Like just there's like, it's not even so much that people are trying to like not put their best foot forward. They just don't have any roadmap for how to do it. And so I've been on the side, I help people, who are they at their core? Because again, I had such a struggle with that feeling myself. Who are they actually trying to attract? And like, how do we sort of like create a self-mark, like how do we put their best self out there? In a way that tells a story about their evolution and like their highest excitements in a way that feels appealing to that type of person they're trying to attract, right? And so that's a way for me to just create more love and connection in the world because it's something that everybody now uses, dating apps and things like that. And in a world that is post-pandemic, creating as much love and connection is like my highest truth, like I went to some dark places in that space and I know a lot of people did. And I just want to keep creating more opportunities for people to feel that heart-led, like soul joy with another human, however that ends up manifesting. So, yeah, thanks for asking.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you
Thanks,
so
my
much.
love. So great to talk to you.
You too.